11 days before my wedding, a barista handed me a phone across the counter and said, "Hey, is this your boyfriend's?" He left it on the table. My name is Corinne, and the phone she handed me wasn't just Adam's. It was unlocked, screen still glowing, notifications stacking up in real time on the lock screen while I stood there holding it. I want to tell you exactly what I saw over the next 4 minutes, standing at that counter, because those 4 minutes are the reason I am not currently married. Some context first, because you need to understand how unremarkable that Tuesday morning was before it wasn't. Adam and I had been together 3 years. We met at a mutual friend's trivia night, bonded immediately over both correctly answering an obscure question about 1990s sitcoms, and from there things moved at what felt, at the time, like a completely normal, healthy pace. Moved in together at year 1. Got engaged at year 2.5, a quiet proposal at home rather than some big production, which I'd always liked about him. Adam wasn't a performer. He was steady, reliable, the kind of guy who texted, landed safe, every single time he flew, unprompted, because he knew I worried. He worked in commercial real estate, which meant a genuinely demanding, unpredictable schedule, property walkthroughs, closing calls that ran late, client dinners that sometimes ran later. I never questioned the hours because the industry itself explained them. Everyone I'd ever met who worked in that field kept a similarly chaotic calendar. That Tuesday morning, I'd stopped by our usual coffee shop before work, the one 4 blocks from our apartment where Adam and I had breakfast together most weekend mornings and where, apparently, he'd stopped in solo about 90 minutes before I got there, based on what the barista, a college kid named Theo who knew us both by name and order, told me. He was in a rush, Theo said, sliding the phone across the counter. Left before I could flag him down. I figured you'd swing by eventually since you guys always come in together on weekends, so I just held on to it. The screen lit up in my hand almost the second I picked it up. A text preview, banner notification, the kind that shows the first line of a message right there on the lock screen without you having to unlock anything at all. The name on the notification was not one I recognized. It read, Priya W. And underneath it, the preview line. Did you tell her about the appointment yet, or are we still? The message cut off there, truncated by the lock screen's character limit, which is its own small cruelty, honestly. Just enough to plant something and not nearly enough to resolve it. I stood at that counter for what felt like an extremely long time, but was probably closer to 15 seconds, running through every conceivable explanation. A coworker, a client named Priya, some logistics thing about a property appointment that had absolutely nothing to do with me. I want to be honest that I genuinely tried to talk myself out of what my body already seemed to understand before my brain caught up, because the particular flavor of dread I felt reading that message was not a dread I'd ever associated with coworker logistics before. I didn't try to unlock the phone right there in the coffee shop. I want that on the record, because I think it matters for what happened after. I wasn't some person combing through a partner's phone out of habitual suspicion. I had never once, in 3 years, gone through Adam's phone. I didn't even know his passcode. I texted him from my own phone instead, standing at the counter. You left your phone at the coffee shop. I have it. I'll bring it to you at lunch. He called me back within 90 seconds, which in itself told me something, because Adam almost never called. He texted, always, unless something was genuinely urgent. Oh my God, thank you. I've been looking everywhere. Can you just leave it with Theo? I'll swing back and grab it. Don't want you to have to go out of your way. It was such a small thing, that request. Such a reasonable, considerate-sounding thing to say. And it was also, I realized standing there, the first time in 3 years I could remember Adam actively trying to keep something of his physically away from me, dressed up as thoughtfulness. It's fine, I said. I'm heading that way anyway. I'll drop it at your office. There was a pause. Half a second, maybe less, but long enough that I heard it. You don't have to do that. Seriously, I can. Adam, it's fine. And I hung up before he could keep negotiating a version of events where the phone didn't come anywhere near me for the next several hours. I want to describe what happened in my car in the coffee shop parking lot next, because I think it's the moment the entire wedding actually ended, even though I wouldn't officially call it off for another several days. I sat in the driver's seat holding a phone that wasn't mine, glowing with notifications I hadn't asked for, and I made a decision that I've had to sit with a lot since. I tried the passcode. Our anniversary. It worked on the second try. Actually, I'd guessed the day, month, year in one order first, then reversed it, and the phone opened. I'm not going to pretend that was a good decision, ethically. I've had months to think about whether I regret it, and the honest answer is, I regret almost nothing about how the rest of that day unfolded, because what I found inside that phone was not a private, harmless thing I violated by looking at. It was a second relationship, fully documented, 26 months deep. Here's the shape of what 4 minutes of scrolling revealed, roughly in the order I found it. because I think the order matters. It wasn't one clean confession. It was a slow accumulation of smaller and smaller shocks stacking on top of each other until the whole picture assembled itself. First, the thread with Priya W. went back over 2 years. Not weeks, not months. 2 years, meaning it started roughly 6 months before Adam and I got engaged, which meant the man who'd proposed to me at home, quietly, no big production because he wasn't a performer, had already been building something else on the side for half a year at the point he asked me to marry him. Second, scrolling further back, a pinned message near the top of the thread, the kind you pin because it matters to you, a photo. Priya, arm around Adam. Both of them laughing at what looked like a rooftop bar, captioned by him, underneath the photo, with a single heart emoji and the words "best night in a long time." I checked the timestamp. It was dated 4 days after our engagement party. Third, and this is the one that actually made me put the phone down on the passenger seat and just breathe for a minute before I could pick it back up, a message from 3 weeks earlier, close to present day, that read, "I know the wedding is happening, but I need you to actually hear me when I say I can't keep doing this waiting thing much longer. You said after the wedding things would change. I need that to actually be true this time. After the wedding, things would change." I read that line probably 8 times, trying to extract every possible meaning out of it, and every single interpretation I could construct landed in the same place. Adam had told another woman, repeatedly, apparently, that our wedding was a temporary formality he intended to move past, a box he needed to check before he could fully transition into whatever he and Priya actually were. Fourth, and this is the detail that reframed everything else I'd find over the following days, a message from Priya 7 months back that read, "My mom keeps asking when she's going to meet you officially, not just hear about you. What do I even tell her?" Followed by Adam's response, "Tell her soon. I promise. I just need to get through this next stretch first." This next stretch, our wedding, our entire engagement, apparently existed in Priya's understanding of the world as an obstacle Adam needed to get through. A temporary complication standing between the two of them and whatever life he'd been quietly promising her for over a year, in exactly the mirror image way I understood our engagement to be the actual, real, primary thing happening in his life. I sat in that parking lot for 40 minutes. I didn't cry, not yet. I was too busy doing something closer to forensic work, screenshotting message after message onto my own phone, documenting dates, building a timeline, because some cold, clear-headed part of my brain understood, even in the middle of the shock, that I was going to need proof of exactly how long this had been running, both for myself and for the extremely difficult conversations I could already see coming with vendors, with my parents, with everyone who'd already RSVP'd. I found out things about Priya over those 40 minutes that I never wanted to know and now can't unknow. She worked in event planning, ironically, a detail that felt almost too on the nose when I found it. This woman who spent her professional life helping other people plan the exact kind of milestone event her own relationship apparently existed in permanent proximity to without ever quite becoming one. She lived across town, in a building I'd apparently driven past dozens of times without knowing it. She had, based on messages going back 8 months, been to Adam's apartment. Our apartment, technically, though we'd moved in together only after his lease ended. So there was apparently a window, right at the very start of us living together, where he still had lingering access to keep a version of his old place running as a meeting point. She had met his college roommate. She had, based on one particularly gutting exchange from 4 months ago, been present at his cousin's birthday party, introduced, according to the message thread, as a friend from work. A lie so mundane it had apparently satisfied an entire extended family for months. I called my sister first, not Adam. I needed someone to physically anchor me before I did anything else, and my sister has always been the person I call when the ground is actively moving. She drove to meet me in that parking lot. I hadn't even left yet. I genuinely could not make myself drive in the state I was in, and she sat with me while I showed her screenshot after screenshot, her face shifting from confusion to horror to a very specific, very focused anger that I recognized because it's the same anger I feel when someone hurts her. "You are not giving him the phone back today," she said. "You're not giving him anything today. Today you go home. You save everything, and tomorrow you decide what happens next with a clear head." I want to skip ahead slightly to the confrontation because I think what happened in between, the drive home, the sleepless night, the moment I finally worked up the nerve to open the thread all the way back to its very first message, dated 26 months earlier, a simple "Hey, it was great meeting you at the conference," that had apparently metastasized over 2 years into an entire shadow relationship, is less important than what came out of Adam's mouth once I finally confronted him. He came home that evening expecting, I think, a slightly awkward conversation about a misplaced phone. Maybe some mild embarrassment about a notification I might have glimpsed. What he got instead was me sitting at our kitchen table with his phone in front of me, screen up, open to the pinned photo from 4 days after our engagement party. He didn't try to deny it. I want to give him that much. He didn't insult me by attempting some elaborate lie once the evidence was that thoroughly laid out in front of him. What he did instead, over the following 2 hours, was slowly, haltingly, explain a version of events that I've had to sit with a long time to fully process. He'd met Priya at a work conference roughly 2 months before we got engaged, not after, which meant the relationship's origin predated my proposal by a slightly narrower margin than I'd initially calculated, though the practical difference between 2 months before and 6 months before felt, in the moment, almost academic. What started, he insisted, as something genuinely unplanned and unintentional, a connection he didn't go looking for, had, over the following months, calcified into something he described, in the single most enraging sentence of that entire conversation, as a whole separate life I didn't know how to close the door on once I'd already opened it. Why propose to me? Then, I asked, the same question I imagine every person in this exact situation eventually asks, because there is no version of the answer that doesn't indict the person answering it. Because I loved you. I do love you. I couldn't figure out how to stop the other thing without blowing up everything. And the longer it went, the harder it got to stop. And somewhere along the way, I just decided I could keep doing both until I figured it out. Until you figured it out, I repeated. That was going to be your wedding present to yourself? Figuring it out sometime after I already signed a marriage license. He didn't have an answer for that, because there isn't one. I found out, over the following days, piecing together the full timeline from the screenshots and a few increasingly desperate follow-up conversations, that Priya had genuinely believed, for the better part of a year, that Adam intended to leave me before the wedding, not after it, that this next stretch she kept referencing was supposed to end well before any vows were exchanged, and that as our actual wedding date got closer and closer with no sign of that promised ending materializing, her messages had shifted from patient to increasingly frantic, a shift I could track in real time across the screenshots, her tone curdling from hopeful to hurt too. In the most recent messages, something close to the same devastated confusion I was feeling myself. Two women, both told, in their own separate threads, that they were the real relationship and the other situation was the temporary complication about to resolve in their favor. I recognized the shape of it even through my own devastation, because it's a genuinely specific, almost architectural kind of cruelty. Not one lie told once, but two parallel, mutually exclusive lies, each carefully maintained long enough that both women built entire emotional futures on top of them simultaneously. I called off the wedding the next morning, 11 days out, which meant vendors, which meant deposits, which meant an excruciating 48 hours of phone calls that I will spare you the full details of except to say that our florist, God bless her, refunded half our deposit unprompted the moment I gave her the short version through tears, and our caterer did not, and I have still, to this day, not fully forgiven the caterer for that, even though I understand contractually she was completely within her rights. My parents had already flown in from out of state, already checked into their hotel, already had their outfits steamed and hanging in the hotel closet. I had to sit across from them at a diner near their hotel and explain, through the kind of crying that makes it hard to actually form words, why the wedding they'd flown in for wasn't happening. My dad, who is not a demonstrative man, who I have maybe seen cry twice in my entire life, had to leave the table for several minutes partway through that conversation. And when he came back, he just put his hand over mine on the table and said, "Okay, tell me what you need me to do," which is, I think, the most quietly devastating and also the most quietly loving thing anyone said to me during that entire week. I never spoke to Priya directly. I thought about it. I drafted a message more than once, in the raw, insomniac days right after everything came out, but I ultimately decided against sending it, for reasons that took me a while to fully articulate even to myself. I didn't think a conversation between the two of us would actually give either of us anything real. We'd both been managed by the same person, told two versions of the same story engineered specifically to keep us both compliant, and I didn't think comparing notes with her was going to undo any of that. I do know, through a mutual acquaintance who reached out to me a few months later with genuinely good intentions, that Priya and Adam are no longer together, that whatever ending she'd been promised for over a year finally arrived, just not in the shape either of them had spent 2 years imagining. I moved out of our apartment within 3 weeks, into a friend's spare room while I figured out my next steps, deliberately not taking anything that felt like it belonged to the life I'd been building on a foundation I now understood had never been solid. I started therapy about a month after everything happened, later than I probably should have, because the first several weeks were consumed entirely by logistics, canceling vendors, returning gifts, the same excruciating conversation with different relatives more times than I can count. My therapist has helped me sit with something I didn't have language for in the immediate aftermath, which is that the specific shame I felt, the reflexive, how did I not notice sooner spiral that ran on a loop in my head for the first 2 months, wasn't actually mine to carry. 2 years of carefully maintained deception, complete with cover stories thorough enough to survive introductions to extended family, complete with a physical staging area at his old apartment during exactly the window it would be least suspicious, is not something a normal, trusting partner is failing at by not detecting. It's not a vigilance problem. It's a scale of effort problem, and the effort was entirely on his side, built specifically to be undetectable from mine. I think, more than anything, about those 4 minutes at the coffee shop counter, holding a phone that wasn't mine, watching a notification stack up in real time from a name I didn't recognize. I think about how close I came to simply telling Theo to hold on to it until Adam came back, the way Adam himself had asked me to on the phone, the way I nearly agreed to before some small stubborn part of me decided the extra 20 minutes of inconvenience of dropping it off myself was worth it. I think about the version of this story where I hand the phone back sight unseen, where the wedding happens 11 days later exactly as planned, where I spend who knows how many years, months, years, maybe an entire marriage, never finding out that an entire second relationship had been running in parallel underneath mine the whole time. It's been just over 5 months now. My mother said something to me about 3 weeks after everything fell apart that I still think about often, sitting across from her at her kitchen table, picking at food I wasn't really eating. She said, "You didn't waste 3 years, Corinne. You found out the truth in 3 years instead of in 30. That's not the same thing as losing everything. That's actually the version of this where you got lucky." I didn't believe her at the time. I believe her more now, 5 months out, with enough distance to actually see the shape of what I avoided instead of only the shape of what I lost. I think about Theo sometimes too. Honestly, the barista who just happened to remember which couple that phone belonged to, who could have just left it in a lost and found bin behind the counter for Adam to eventually retrieve himself. No questions asked, no detour through my hands at all. I don't know if I believe in fate, exactly, but I believe in the strange, thin margins these things sometimes hinge on. A phone left on a table, a barista with a good memory for regulars, 20 minutes of stubbornness about who got to drop off a lost device. That's genuinely all it took to unravel 26 months of a lie that otherwise showed no signs of ever surfacing on its own. If you've ever had the whole truth of a relationship handed to you by accident, a misplaced phone, a stray notification, something you were never supposed to see, I want to hear how it happened. I think almost everyone who's lived through something like this has their own version of that one small object or accident that cracked the whole thing open. And there's something strange and almost communal about realizing how many of us are only standing where we are because of a coincidence we didn't ask for and can't take credit for. 11 days. One forgotten phone. That's all it took to learn which version of my life was ever actually real.